They say life doesn't give warnings before it changes. It just shifts, silently, and you only realize it when everything familiar starts to feel strange. That morning, I felt something in the wind. Not a breeze, not a chill. Something heavier, like the air was carrying a secret. The sky was duller than usual, the silence too perfect. I didn't know it then, but with one simple act, offering help to a stranger carrying water, my entire story would begin to unravel. Because that woman wasn't just passing through, she came looking for someone, and that someone was me. The sun hadn't yet climbed high, but the heat already pressed down on my shoulders as I stepped outside with my metal water bucket clanging softly by my side. My sandals sank slightly into the red earth as I made my usual journey toward the river. Same path, same rhythm, same tired breath. I'd done this hundreds of times, maybe thousands. My feet knew the way so well I barely had to look. Past the broken fence where the goats always tried to escape. Past the twisted mango tree that never bore fruit. The same dusty bend near the fig tree where the hill sloped gently toward the water. But this time, there was something new. A figure stood ahead, hunched awkwardly over a yellow jerry can. A woman. Her blouse was spotless, her skirt too smooth, her shoes completely wrong for this terrain. She looked like she had walked out of a hotel room, not a village hut. She wasn't from here. That much was clear. I slowed my steps, watched her struggle. She kept bending over, trying to lift the can, but each time it tipped or slipped from her hands. Her frustration was quiet, internal, but fierce, like someone who didn't want to ask for help. Her back was to me when I spoke. "You need help." She turned, startled. And in that moment, our eyes met for the first time. Her face was beautiful in a tired sort of way. She looked like she hadn't slept in days, yet carried herself with quiet control. But her eyes were doing something else entirely. They scanned me, studied me, not in judgment, not even in fear, but in recognition. She nodded. "Yes, thank you." I bent down and grabbed the jerry can, surprised by how light it still was. She hadn't made it far at all. I motioned toward the river, and we walked together, me carrying the water, her carrying something invisible but much heavier. She didn't speak. I didn't ask. The silence wasn't awkward. It felt deliberate. The closer we got to the river, the more I noticed her watching everything. Her eyes moved constantly, tracking homes, counting chickens, staring at children running barefoot across the path. It wasn't idle curiosity. It was like she was searching for something. When we finally reached the riverbank, I placed the can down beside her. She didn't move. She just stared at the water, like it was a doorway to a different time. She didn't sit. She didn't speak. She simply stared. I filled her can for her. Still, she said nothing. Finally, I broke the silence. "First time fetching water?" Her lips curled slightly. "Not exactly," she said. "I used to come to a river like this, a long time ago." I raised a brow. "Here?" She didn't answer, just picked up the filled can and began walking back. I followed beside her. The weight of what wasn't said grew heavier than the plastic jug in my hand. "Are you visiting someone?" I asked. "No, just looking around," she replied, her voice soft but clipped. She stopped briefly to watch a group of women pounding yam outside their hut. She lingered as we passed a row of children playing with old tires. Each time, her body stiffened slightly, like she was bracing herself to feel something. Then she turned to me. "What's your name?" I told her. "And your mother?" "Rose," I replied. That name did something to her. She blinked fast, like she was fighting off emotion, then looked away. "You okay?" I asked. She nodded, but her face said otherwise. We continued in silence until we reached the edge of the village. Then, just as I thought she'd say goodbye and thank me, she stopped, turned to face me fully, and asked the one question that broke everything open. "Were you born here?" she asked. Her voice was gentle, but it sliced through the air like a blade. I laughed nervously, unsure why such a simple question made my skin crawl. Yes, I said. I think so. Why? But she didn't answer. She just kept staring at me with those heavy, searching eyes, and suddenly I wasn't so sure of anything. Not where I came from, not who she was, and not why. Her question felt more like a memory than curiosity. I thought our encounter at the river was the end of it. A stranger passing through, a moment of help, then gone. But she didn't leave. She stayed, and the longer she lingered, the more I realized she wasn't here by accident. She walked through the village like someone flipping through an old, forgotten photo album. Her eyes didn't just look, they searched. For faces, for answers, for ghosts. And as each question left her lips, it became clearer. She was unraveling something buried deep in our village, and whatever she was looking for, it had everything to do with my family. And maybe, with me. Grace didn't blend in, not even when she tried. She moved through the village slowly, carefully, like someone reading a sacred text, pausing at corners, watching the way people walked, listening to the names that were casually spoken. She didn't just observe, she absorbed. I caught glimpses of her that day, talking softly with elders, sitting by the palm seller's stall, looking closely at the mural outside the community center, where old stories and missing persons were painted in fading colors. She wasn't sightseeing. She was building something. A timeline, maybe. A map. A memory. Later that afternoon, I found her again, this time seated on the edge of the well. Her hands rested in her lap. Her face was calm, but her eyes were storming. She looked up as I approached. "Your village has changed," she said. "You've been here before?" I asked cautiously. "Yes, a long time ago. I was very young." She looked around again, her expression far away. "But not much feels different. Just older, like a dream you keep returning to." I didn't know what to say. There was something haunting about the way she spoke, like every word held a hidden ache. Then she asked, "What happened to the old school? The one with the yellow fence?" I blinked. That school had burned down almost 15 years ago. Only people who'd lived here would remember that detail. I told her. She nodded slowly. "That's what I thought." She began naming people. Random names. Old names. "Does Mama and Didi still live near the church? Did the Obina family ever move? Is anyone still in the blue-roofed compound across from the well?" I stared at her, stunned. Those were names from deep in the past. Some of them were no longer alive. Some had left the village long ago, and yet she asked like they were neighbors she'd seen yesterday. Then she leaned closer. "And your mother, Rose, is she home now?" I stiffened. "You remember her?" She nodded. "Sort of. Not well, but I remember the name. I need to speak to her." She stood abruptly. "Please, can you take me to her?" We walked back toward my home. The air between us felt heavier than before, as if her presence was pressing into the past, trying to drag it forward. We stepped into the compound and found my mother sitting on her usual wooden stool, slicing okra with an old kitchen knife. Grace stopped a few feet away, uncertain now, almost trembling. "Rose," she said, voice gentle but shaking. My mother looked up and froze. Her hand stopped mid-slice. I watched her face go pale, the knife slipping slightly from her fingers. Grace took a cautious step forward. "Do you remember me?" "Grace?" "Evelyn's sister." The silence that followed was deafening. My mother's lips parted, but no words came. Her eyes flicked toward me, then back to Grace. Finally she nodded. Once, painfully. "I remember you," she said. I had never seen my mother look so exposed, like someone had cracked her open and all her secrets were rushing out behind her eyes. Grace pulled something from her bag. A photo. She unfolded it and held it out. My mother didn't take it, but she looked. I leaned in. It was a black and white image of a teenage girl holding a baby wrapped in patterned cloth. The girl had soft features, wide, hopeful eyes that looked oddly familiar. My heart began to pound. "This was Evelyn," Grace said softly. "She had a daughter. The baby disappeared after Evelyn died. No one knew what happened." My mother's voice was barely a whisper. "She was left, behind, at the clinic." "Do you know what happened to her?" Grace asked. My mother didn't answer. I looked between them. "Mama, what's going on?" Still no answer. Grace stepped forward. "That baby would be about 24 now." Then she looked at me. My knees went weak. "Do you remember anything?" I asked my mother. "Did you see her?" She stood up slowly, the knife still in her hand, forgotten. Her face was unreadable. She looked at me, then at Grace, then back at me, and for a moment I swear she looked afraid. Grace turned back to me and spoke just above a whisper. "I think your mother knew someone important." But the way her voice cracked, the way she said it wasn't speculation. It was personal. It was intimate. It was a memory clawing its way back. A cold chill ran through me. Was she here looking for a story from the past? Or was she here looking for me? I always believed silence meant peace. But that day, I learned silence can scream. When I told my mother about Grace, about her questions, her sister Evelyn, and the missing child, I expected confusion, maybe laughter, maybe a dismissive shrug. But what I got was fear. A quiet, paralyzing fear that wrapped itself around my mother's face like a ghost had whispered in her ear. She didn't blink. She didn't breathe. For a moment it was like she was watching a nightmare walk back into her life. And that's when I knew. Grace hadn't brought questions. She had brought something far more dangerous. She had brought the truth. She didn't say anything at first, just stood still in our little kitchen yard, holding a half-peeled yam in one hand and the knife in the other. The knife dropped before the yam did. "Evelyn?" she repeated, as though tasting the name for the first time in decades. "Yes," I said, watching her closely. "Grace is her sister." Her lips trembled, but no sound came. Instead, she walked away. No explanation, no comment. Just walked straight into her room and closed the door behind her. I stood there, stunned. The knife lay on the ground. The yam rolled slightly on the dirt floor. I could still smell the smoke from the morning fire, but everything felt colder. Later that night, I crept up to her door. I heard her, sobbing, quietly, carefully, like she didn't want anyone to know she was unraveling inside. And I realized something I had never considered before. My mother was hiding something, not from the village, from me. The next morning, she acted like nothing happened. She didn't mention Grace. She didn't say a word about Evelyn, not even when I tried to bring it up over breakfast. "She's just another woman with too much pain," my mother said. "Let her pass." But I couldn't let it pass, not after seeing her reaction, not after hearing her cry behind a locked door. And Grace wasn't leaving either. I found her again that afternoon by the old chapel steps, waiting for me. Her face looked different this time, less determined, more tired, as if searching had taken something out of her. "I didn't come empty-handed," she said softly. She pulled out a cloth-wrapped bundle and carefully untied it. Inside was a photograph, worn, faded, but intact. She handed it to me without saying a word. I looked down. It was a picture of a young woman, barely more than a girl, holding a newborn wrapped in patterned cloth. The photo had been folded so many times the edges had nearly vanished. "This is Evelyn," she said finally. "The day her daughter was born. She called her Hope." I stared at the image. I didn't recognize the girl. But the baby looked familiar. Grace continued. "My sister died 3 days later. She was only 17. The hospital was chaotic. There was a mix-up, and when I came back to find her baby, she was gone. Disappeared." I swallowed hard. "I think your mother knows what happened," she said, watching me closely. "She was working at the clinic then, wasn't she?" I nodded slowly. "Only part-time, assisting the nurses, cleaning instruments. She never talked about it much." Grace's eyes glistened. "That's because she knows something." I looked back at the photo. The baby had a tiny mark on her neck, just under the jawline. A birthmark, the same one I had. My throat closed. "I know how crazy it sounds," Grace said gently, "but I've followed so many dead ends. This one feels different." I couldn't think. I couldn't speak. So I went home. That night I waited until my mother had gone to bed. I crept into the storage room where she kept old documents, photos, records. Half of them were ruined by damp or rats. But in the far back, behind a cracked trunk, I found a faded envelope with my name written on it. The handwriting wasn't hers. Inside was a tiny bracelet, too small for any adult wrist, and a folded letter. I didn't open it right away. I stared at it for hours, hands shaking, as if opening it would open something in me I wasn't ready to face. The bracelet had beads, blue and green, with letters faintly spelling out HOPE. That name again. The same name Grace had spoken. Could it really be me? Could my life, my entire life, be built on a story no one ever told me? I went to Grace the next morning and gave her the bracelet. She didn't cry. She just whispered, "I gave this to her the day she was born." Then she handed me the second half of the photo, the one she hadn't shown before. 2 women stood beside Evelyn. One of them was my mother. And suddenly, everything I believed about my beginning started to fall apart. Have you ever seen a photo of yourself from a time you don't remember living? That's what it felt like. The moment I saw that picture, something inside me split open. I had never held that baby. I had never worn that cloth. But deep in my bones, I knew the truth before I even let myself believe it. It was like staring into a past someone had worked very hard to keep buried. And suddenly, I wasn't just looking at a baby in a photo. I was looking at the girl I might have been. The girl someone didn't want me to know I ever was. Grace's hands trembled as she passed me the photograph. I tried to hold it steady, but my fingers refused to stop shaking. It was just paper, old and faded, barely held together at the edges. But the weight it carried, I could feel it pressing down on my chest like it had waited years to crush me. In the photo, Evelyn, barely more than a teenager, sat on a hospital cot, holding a newborn wrapped in patterned cloth. Her face was exhausted, but radiant. The way she looked at the baby told you everything you needed to know. This child was wanted, loved, meant for a future. That baby, she had a faint mark on the side of her neck, a crescent, just like mine. "I found this buried among my sister's things," Grace whispered. "My mother saved it. I had forgotten it existed until last week." I couldn't take my eyes off it. "I have this mark," I said numbly, touching the spot beneath my jaw. Grace nodded. "She was the only one born with it. We used to call her our moonchild." Moonchild, a word meant for someone else. But it gripped something inside me, something I didn't know had been waiting its whole life to be named. Still, my mind fought back. "This could be any baby," I muttered. Grace looked at me, eyes shining. "And yet, it looks exactly like you." I felt dizzy. Everything she'd said so far came rushing back. The missing records, the matching birthmark, the lack of a birth certificate. The whispers I'd never listened to. My mother's silence, her tears, the bracelet hidden beneath the bed. "I need more," I said. "I need something that can't be coincidence." Grace opened her bag again and pulled out a tiny book, a worn hospital notebook with pages curled from age and water damage. She flipped it open carefully. There, scrawled in faded ink, were 3 entries. One for Evelyn, one for her baby, Hope, and then a final note, stamped 3 days later. "Discharged to unknown guardian. Records incomplete." No name, No explanation. No witness signature. Just a disappearance, written in passive ink. My mother begged the hospital to explain, Grace said. They told her the baby had been taken to social services, but there were no files, no adoption, no foster care trail. She was gone. I stood up abruptly and walked away, heart pounding in my ears. Gone. Was that me? Had I been the baby everyone forgot? Had I lived my whole life wearing someone else's name? I found myself standing outside my house, staring at the door. I wanted to storm in and demand everything. I wanted answers, and I wanted them now. But I also knew the look on my mother's face last night, the fear, the heartbreak, and I knew this wasn't a story she'd kept from me lightly. She was protecting something, or maybe someone. I went inside. She was sitting in her room, folding clothes in silence. Her back was turned to me, but I didn't wait. I dropped the photo beside her. She froze. Then she picked it up. Her breath hitched. "Where did you get this?" she asked, her voice thin. "From Grace." She didn't respond. Her hands lowered, the fabric slipping from her lap. "She says this baby is me," I said, stepping closer. Silence. "She says you found her, me, at the clinic, and that you took me in without telling anyone." More silence. "Is it true?" Still. Nothing. Then finally, in the smallest voice I had ever heard her use, she whispered, "I didn't steal you." Tears began to roll down her cheeks. She still hadn't turned to face me. "You were alone," she said. "Cold, crying, wrapped in blood and silence. No mother, no nurse. Just you. I waited for hours, but no one came. So I wrapped you again and took you home." I stood frozen. "I was going to report it," she continued. "But then I couldn't let go. And after a few days, it was like you were mine. You smiled. You slept on my chest. You held my finger. I told myself maybe that was enough. I didn't know whether to cry, scream, or collapse. I turned and walked out of the room. The world felt suddenly too small. My own name felt foreign on my tongue. Every photo on our wall felt like it belonged to someone else's story. That night, I stood in front of the mirror for hours, searching my face for someone I'd never met. And as I stared at my own reflection, one question echoed louder than any other. If Grace was right, and Evelyn was my mother, then who was I now? A daughter without a name? Or the truth someone had buried and never meant to be found? Sometimes the truth doesn't walk through the front door. It waits in the silence, buried deep in the floorboards, hoping you'll stop running long enough to find it. That night, I couldn't breathe. I couldn't sleep. My thoughts were louder than the wind outside. Every word Grace had spoken echoed in my head, each one cracking the foundation of my reality. And then, a sound. A creak beneath the bed. One I'd never heard before, as if the house itself had grown tired of holding secrets. I slid to the floor and pressed my ear against the boards. The sound came again, faint, hollow, like breath under wood. My heart pounded as I pulled the bed aside. Dust rose, choking me with its weight. My fingers found a loose plank, one I'd never noticed before. It gave way with a soft groan. Beneath it was a cloth bundle, wrapped tightly and tied with a threadbare shoelace. My hand shook as I lifted it out. It was light, but it felt heavy with something else. Something sacred. Or dangerous. I untied it slowly. Inside were 3 items: a photograph, a broken child's bracelet, and a folded letter, the edges yellowed, the ink bleeding, into the paper, like it had cried, too. I unfolded the photo first. It showed a teenage girl, Evelyn. Her arms cradled a newborn, wrapped in a patterned cloth nearly identical to the one I'd found in Grace's picture. The girl was young, tired, but glowing with something soft and fierce. The baby. She looked familiar. Too familiar. Her tiny face mirrored mine in old pictures. Her neck held a faint crescent-shaped birthmark, the same one under my own jawline. I reached for the bracelet next. Beads, once bright, now faded, spelled a name. Hope. The final piece was the letter. Its handwriting was careful, but rushed, as if the writer had been desperate to finish it before the world took her chance away. To my daughter, if you ever find this. I froze. Know that you were never forgotten. I loved you the moment I saw you. I named you Hope because that's what you gave me. I was scared, young, alone, but you gave me courage. I don't know who's raising you now, but I pray they love you like I did. And if you're reading this, it means I never got to tell you myself. It was signed, Evelyn. I pressed the paper against my chest. She had written to me, not to someone like me, to me. And my mother, Rose, had hidden it beneath my bed all these years. Why? What was she so afraid I'd find? I didn't wait till morning. I ran through the dark village, bare feet slapping against cool dirt, letter clutched to my chest like a heartbeat. Grace answered her door immediately, as if she hadn't slept either. The moment she saw my face, she knew. She didn't ask questions. She just held out her hands. I gave her the bundle in silence. She unfolded the letter slowly, her lips trembling as her eyes moved across each word. When she finished, she clutched it to her chest and let out a breath so broken it felt like something inside her had finally been released. I knew she'd leave something behind, she whispered. Evelyn never did anything without love. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I showed her the bracelet next. Grace held it gently. I made this for her, the day she was born. I thought it was gone forever. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Finally, she looked up. We need to be sure. She opened a drawer and pulled out a slim box. Inside were 2 swabs and a sealed envelope. A DNA test. I've had this ready for months, she said, but I didn't want to push you. I'm ready now, I said. And I was, because not knowing had become its own kind of pain. We sat on her porch and followed the instructions. 1 swab each, 30 seconds, seal, sign, ship. Grace called a courier the next morning. She paid for express processing. Within hours, the kit was on its way to the city. And then, the hardest part began. Waiting. I couldn't stay at home, not with my mother moving through the house like a ghost, quiet, present, but unreachable. We didn't speak much during those days. I didn't know what to say. Neither did she. At night, I reread the letter until the ink blurred behind my tears. During the day, I helped Grace catalog everything she remembered. Evelyn's journals, photos, even baby clothes saved in an old suitcase. Piece by piece, I started to see my reflection forming, not just in a mirror, but in memories I had never lived. Was that what it meant to find your origin? Or was I just losing myself in someone else's history? 3 days later, the courier returned. He handed Grace a plain white envelope. No markings, no hints, just the weight of everything we were about to know. We sat beside each other, hands trembling as we broke the seal. Inside was a single page, and in one clean line, the truth. I read it, then read it again, and again, because the answer wasn't just yes, it was the beginning, and it would change everything. Truth isn't always loud. Sometimes it arrives in silence, with a white envelope and a sentence that changes your entire identity. I used to think answers would feel like relief, but when Grace opened that letter, the words became real. It didn't feel like peace. It felt like falling. My name, my story, my childhood. Everything collapsed under one cruel, quiet sentence. You're Evelyn's daughter. The moment Grace held the envelope in her hands, everything in the room changed. The air turned thick, like it knew it was holding its breath too. Her fingers trembled slightly as she peeled the seal, like even the paper understood what it carried. We were both sitting on the edge of her bed. My legs were numb, my hands clenched into fists. My heart pounded so loud, I was sure she could hear it. She pulled out the sheet. 1 page. Just one. But it held the answer to everything. Her eyes scanned the top. Then slowly, she looked at me. "It's confirmed," she whispered. And that's when my knees gave out. I sank to the floor, not from shock, but from something deeper, something I couldn't name. It was like my bones had betrayed me, like my body suddenly didn't know who it belonged to. Evelyn's daughter. Not Rose's, not the girl raised in the small clay house near the well, not the child who sat under mango trees while her mother plaited her hair, not the girl who sang to herself while grinding maize, believing she was safe, loved, known. That version of me disappeared. Grace didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. The silence between us said it all. She sat on the floor beside me, her hand finding mine. Her grip wasn't tight. It was gentle, like she knew I needed to feel something, but not be held down by it. "I knew it," she said softly. "But I prayed I was wrong. For your sake." I couldn't speak. I couldn't even cry. I wasn't sure what I felt. Joy? Anger? Grief? Maybe all of them. Maybe none. Because sometimes the truth is too big for your heart to hold at once. Later that day, I walked home slowly, dragging my feet like I was walking through wet cement. The village looked the same, but it didn't feel like mine anymore. Children played near the well. A woman shouted at her goat. 2 men argued about palm oil prices. And I just floated through it all. Invisible, weightless, unreal. I found my mother, Rose, shelling beans in silence. She didn't look up when I approached. She just kept her hands moving methodically, as if that rhythm could shield her from what was coming. I sat beside her. The DNA results were still in my pocket. "I know now," I said quietly. Her hands slowed. "You were right," I added. "You didn't steal me. But you didn't tell the truth either." She nodded, still not looking at me. "I loved you like you were mine," she whispered. "More than mine." "I know." And I did. But it didn't make the ache go away. "You lied every year," I said. "Every birthday. I'm so glad I gave birth to you." Her voice cracked. "Because if I didn't say it, I might lose you. But I was never yours to keep." Those words felt cruel the moment I said them. And yet, they were true. She finally looked up. Her eyes were tired. Not from age. From holding this secret for 24 years. "I never wanted to erase her," she said. "I just wanted to give you something she couldn't." I nodded. And then I stood up, because I couldn't sit there any longer pretending everything would be okay. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. No tears, no thoughts, just emptiness. I wasn't angry at her. Not exactly. But I didn't know how to love her the same anymore. That was the part no one talks about. What happens after the truth. You don't just go back. You don't just say, "I understand," because you don't. Because something breaks, and no matter how much glue you pour on it, it's never the same shape again. The next morning, I packed a small bag. Just a few clothes. The photo. The bracelet. The letter. I told my mother I was leaving for a few days. She didn't stop me. She just asked one question. "Will you come back?" I didn't answer, because I didn't know. All I knew was, if I was really Evelyn's daughter, then it was time I learned who Evelyn was. How do you walk back into the arms of someone who loved you, but lied to you your whole life? I held the DNA results like a weapon and a wound at the same time. My heart knew what I wanted, to forgive. But my mind clung to the betrayal like a scar that wouldn't fade. She was sitting at the table, staring into her cup like it could offer her a way out. And I was standing there, torn between the woman who raised me and the mother I never got to know. Both had a claim on my heart, but only one had told me the truth. My feet dragged as I stepped inside the house. The air felt thicker than usual, like the walls themselves knew what was coming. She sat at the wooden table, still quiet, fragile. The same woman who had once taught me how to braid my hair, cook porridge, whisper prayers. But today she looked like a stranger wearing her skin. I stood behind the chair across from her and slowly placed the DNA envelope on the table. It made a soft sound, barely a whisper, but it echoed through the room like thunder. She didn't touch it. She didn't need to. "I already know," she said, voice hoarse. I waited, and then she finally spoke the words she'd buried for 24 years. "I found you outside the hospital, wrapped in a piece of cloth. You were crying, alone. The nurse who handed you to me vanished before I could even ask her name. And I couldn't walk away." She looked up at me, eyes full of tears. "I told myself someone would come back, that I'd return you the moment they did. But days passed, then weeks, and you," her voice cracked, "you smiled at me like I was home. So I stayed. I stayed with you." I was crying now, but my voice was steady. "You should have told me." "I know. You made me believe I was yours. I wanted you to feel wanted. You let me build a life on a lie." She nodded. "I thought if I loved you hard enough, the truth wouldn't matter." I sat down slowly, my body heavy with confusion. "I don't hate you," I whispered, "but I don't know how to be your daughter anymore." She reached for my hand, but I didn't move. "I loved you like mine," she said, "because you were, even if the world says otherwise." Grace, who had been quietly standing near the door, stepped forward. Her presence was gentle but impossible to ignore. She knelt beside Rose, not in anger, but in quiet devastation. "I looked for her," Grace said. "For years. Hospitals, orphanages, police. Everyone said the child was gone. But she wasn't. She was here," Rose whispered. "With me. Safe." "She was mine too," Grace replied. Their eyes locked. Two women bound by one child. One story. One impossible truth. I felt like a bridge stretched between two shores, one built on memory, the other on blood. And I couldn't choose where to stand. I stood up. "I don't know how to forgive this," I said. "Not yet." "That's okay," Rose said. "I'll wait, as long as you need." Grace looked at me, her voice soft. "I'm not here to replace her." "I know," I replied, "but she's all I've ever known." We sat together that night, all three of us. No accusations, no shouting, just grief, love, and the ache of everything unspoken. I brought out the bracelet, the one with faded beads that spelled hope. "I found it under the floor," I said. Grace smiled through tears. "Evelyn made it with me. She said her daughter would carry it until the world called her by her true name." I held it tightly. Maybe this was what healing looked like. Not forgetting, but remembering. Together. I got up to fetch water from the kitchen, but as I turned, I heard it. A sudden thud. I spun around. Grace had collapsed, face pale, hands trembling. "Mama!" I screamed. "Help me!" Rose rushed to her side, panic in her eyes, and in that terrifying moment, the woman who had searched for me her whole life was now fighting for hers. When I saw her lying on the floor, her lips pale, breath shallow, and body limp like a leaf torn loose from its tree, I didn't see the powerful woman who had stormed into my life with secrets and answers. I saw someone slipping away before I had the chance to truly know her. My mind screamed at the unfairness of it all. How could the same woman who had held my past in her hands now be collapsing before she could become part of my future? And in that terrifying moment, as we carried her to the clinic, I realized she hadn't just been searching for me with urgency. She had been running out of time, and I never saw it until it was almost too late. We carried her out like she was made of glass, one arm over my shoulder, the other gripped by Rose. Grace's breathing was shallow, but every now and then she squeezed my hand, just to let me know she was still here. The village clinic had only one nurse on duty, but when she saw Grace's condition, her face turned pale. They rushed her inside. The tests began almost immediately. Blood samples, vitals, chest scans done with an old machine that buzzed louder than my heartbeat. Hours passed like smoke, there but impossible to hold on to. When the doctor returned, he didn't sugarcoat it. "It's metastatic," he said. "Advanced. The cancer has spread." His words landed like stones. "How long does she have?" I asked, barely able to form the sentence. He hesitated. "A few months. Maybe less." Less. That word pierced deeper than any truth I had heard so far. I went into her room. She looked smaller than before, like the weight of the truth had physically shrunk her. She smiled when she saw me, but the corners of her lips barely moved. "Hey," I said, sitting beside her. "You scared me." "I scare myself sometimes," she whispered, and tried to laugh, but it came out as a cough. I held her hand. "You knew, didn't you?" I asked. "Before you ever came here?" She nodded slowly. "They told me last year. I started treatment, but it didn't work. When I realized I didn't have long, I knew I couldn't leave this world without finding you." Tears welled in my eyes. "All these years, you were looking for me while dying." She gripped my hand harder. "I wasn't dying," she said. "I was surviving, because hope kept me alive." She reached to her side and pulled out a worn letter. "My will," she said, "and a request. There's a house in the city. Yours if you want it. My lawyer knows everything." I stared at the envelope but didn't touch it. "I don't care about a house," I said. "I care about you. I want to take you with me," she said. "To the city. To live with me for whatever time I have left. I don't want to leave this world without hearing you call me Mama, at least once." The word hit me like thunder. Mama. I already had one. And now, I had two. I went home that night. Rose was waiting. She had heard. The village was small. Secrets never stayed still. "She's not well," I said. Rose nodded. "I'm sorry," she whispered. We sat in silence, and then I asked her the question that had been burning in my chest. "What if I go with her?" She didn't flinch. "You're not a prisoner here," she said. "You never were. I won't stop you." "But will you still be my mother?" I asked. Her eyes filled with tears. "I always will be, even if the world calls you by another name, even if you live somewhere else. I raised you. That doesn't end." The next few days were a blur of medicine, visits, and conversations that felt like they were running out of time. Grace got weaker, but her spirit didn't. Even from her hospital bed, she told stories of Evelyn, of their childhood, of her dreams for me. "You were going to be a dancer," she smiled. "Your mother wanted to name you Melody, but I said Hope was better." "Why?" "Because you were born into chaos," she whispered. "But you gave us a reason to believe in something more." The night before we were supposed to leave for the city, she called me close. Her voice was soft, shaking, but urgent. "I want you to come with me," she said again. "Not because I'm dying, but because I want to live these last days with you. I don't want to leave this world looking for you again." I stared at the hospital walls, at the woman in the bed who carried pieces of me I hadn't even understood yet. And in that moment, standing between two homes, two mothers, and two different futures, I didn't know where I belonged anymore. As the city unfolded before me, towering buildings that kissed the sky, streets that pulsed with color and chaos, and lights so blinding they erased the stars, I realized I was no longer just a village girl holding the hand of a woman who had once been a stranger. I was stepping into a life that should have been mine all along, yet felt terrifyingly foreign, like wearing someone else's memories. Grace clung to my hand, not because she feared I'd run, but because we both knew this world could swallow us whole. And deep down, I feared that beneath all its shine and story, the city might change me before I could even figure out who I really was. The apartment she took me to overlooked a street that never slept. Horns honked at midnight, neon signs blinked like restless eyes, and voices poured in from every window and alley. I stood at the balcony for a long time, watching everything move without me. trying to understand how I was supposed to fit into this world that didn't know my name yesterday, and now claimed me, completely. Inside, the walls were covered with framed memories. Evelyn's photographs, smiling, dancing, holding a baby with eyes that mirrored mine, hung beside childhood drawings, letters Grace had written but never sent, and books with bookmarks she'd saved for one day. That day had come, and it terrified me. "This is your room," Grace said, leading me into a space that felt more like a story than a bedroom. The bed was made with fresh linen, a bookshelf lined with novels Evelyn loved, and on the nightstand, a music box. She opened it, and a soft lullaby filled the room. "I used to sing this to you," she said. "You were only days old, but you calmed when you heard it." I touched the worn metal, feeling something stir deep inside me. A memory I didn't own, but maybe it had always been mine. The days that followed were a strange blur. She introduced me to city life, one step at a time. Museums with walls taller than any building in our village. Coffee shops where people spoke 3 languages in one breath. Parks with fountains, glass elevators, street performers, and strangers who smiled with their eyes down. And every night, as her strength slowly faded, she shared pieces of Evelyn I'd never known. "Your mother loved mangoes but hated the stringy ones," she'd laugh. She cried when she saw fireworks. She used to sketch birds in the margins of her notebook. I listened like a child hearing fairy tales, but with every story, I began to feel less like a visitor, and more like I was reclaiming something. My history, my blood, my place. But Grace's decline was undeniable. She tried to pretend, to dress up, to cook, to laugh like nothing was happening. But I saw her struggle with the stairs. I saw the bruises that didn't heal, the way she held her side when she thought I wasn't looking. I began helping more, cooking her meals, reminding her of medicine times, sleeping near her room in case she called out. She never said the word goodbye, but every touch, every look, every story felt like a slow, painful farewell. One evening, as the sun poured golden fire over the skyline, the doorbell rang. Grace was resting in the armchair, wrapped in her shawl. I opened the door to find a man in a dark suit holding a thick envelope. "Ms. Grace requested I deliver this in person," he said. She beckoned him in with a soft nod. Once he left, she stared at the envelope for a long time. Her fingers trembled as she turned it over, checking the seal. She looked at me, not just with tiredness, but something else. Fear and hope. "This," she whispered, "will change everything." I knelt beside her. She pressed the envelope into my hands. It was heavier than it looked. "What is it?" "Your name, your truth, and a door to something I never thought I'd be alive to give you." I opened the envelope slowly. Inside, legal documents, notarized papers, a printed letter from her lawyer, and something else, something that made my hands go cold. A court-stamped document with my name, or rather, the name I was supposed to have, and just beneath it, a clause that made my throat tighten. Inheritance, guardianship, legacy. As I read the final line, I looked up at Grace. She was watching me with tears in her eyes, because whatever was inside that envelope wasn't just about who I was. It was about everything I had the power to become. As I slowly unfolded that letter, the weight in my hands was heavier than paper. It felt like time itself had curled up into this fragile sheet, trembling with the last breath of a woman who had lived in silence, searched in storms, and finally found the one person she couldn't leave the world without. The ink was slightly smudged at the corners, like tears had kissed the page before it reached me, and her handwriting, steady but slowing, made each word feel like a heartbeat, a whisper, a plea. This was no ordinary goodbye. It wasn't even a farewell. It was a command, a torch passed down from mother to daughter, a promise written in pain and purpose, daring me to step into a life that wasn't just mine. It was built on the dreams of women who had bled for it. There is a strange silence that follows the death of someone who changed your life. It isn't the kind of silence that you welcome. It creeps into your bones, sits behind your ribs, and listens to your every thought, waiting to see what you'll do next. When Grace passed, the city around me didn't stop. Cars kept moving, lights kept flashing, people kept laughing in cafes just below her window. But for me, the world had tilted, and I was no longer standing on the same ground I was born on. The apartment felt larger without her voice. Every room echoed. Every object had meaning. Her perfume still lingered in the curtains. Her scarf hung by the door like she might walk in again and ask me what I wanted for dinner. I wanted to believe she was still in the room, just invisible, watching, waiting, smiling that soft smile that always carried secrets behind it. But the only thing she left behind to speak for her now was the letter. It began, simply, "My hope." I paused there, already trembling. That name had come to mean something different to me now. Not just a word or a label, but an entire world I hadn't understood until she gave it back to me. She didn't waste space with small talk. Every sentence in the letter was a truth, raw, deliberate, meant to outlive her voice. "I knew I was dying long before I ever found you," she wrote. "But I also knew I couldn't leave this earth without giving you what was always yours. Your history, your name, your truth. You were never forgotten. You were just hidden." She spoke about Evelyn not just as a sister, but as a dream, a vision of what women like them could build if given the time, the voice, the tools. She talked about the foundation they began in secret, of their plans to create a sanctuary for abandoned girls, of their relentless faith that one day I would come home, even if I didn't yet know where home really was. Along with the letter was a flash drive. Her lawyer handed it to me at the reading of the will. I brought it home that evening and sat alone as I plugged it into her laptop. The screen flickered once before. Her face filled it, tired but graceful, seated in the very chair I now sat in. "If you're watching this," she said, "then I've gone. And I know that hurts, but I hope it also heals, because now you know the truth, and you are free to become who you were always meant to be." She paused. I built everything I could to prepare for this moment. The apartment, the account, the foundation papers. You are my heir, not because of blood, but because of belief. You are not only Evelyn's daughter, you are the daughter of our dream. Her voice cracked slightly there, but she held it together. I give you not just my world hope, but your mother's wish, our unfinished mission. And if you choose to accept it, you won't just carry us forward. You'll build something we never had the chance to finish. I sat there long after the video ended. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I just listened to the stillness that followed, the weight of those words pressing down on my shoulders like a cloak I had no choice but to wear. I returned to her hospital bed that night. Her body had already been taken, but I needed to say goodbye. I sat beside the empty mattress, the letter in my hands, and read it aloud into the silence. Each word echoed off the walls, as if her spirit still lingered, still listening. When I finished, I whispered, "Thank you, for giving me everything I didn't even know I needed." I felt no warmth, no ghostly breeze, no magical moment. But I did feel peace, and sometimes that's more than enough. The funeral was intimate, just as she'd requested. No press, no spectacle, just a handful of people who had mattered. Her lawyer, a few former colleagues, Rose, and me. Evelyn's picture was placed at the front beside her casket, as if the two sisters were finally reunited after years of silence, heartbreak, and distance. It felt right. It felt full circle. I didn't cry during the burial. I cried after, when I returned to her apartment, now mine, and saw her empty chair near the window. I sat in it, watching the sun set over a city she had loved, and realized something profound. She didn't just leave me a home, she left me a mission. Later that week, I found a wooden box tucked beneath her bed. Inside, blueprints for a future she never got to build, a new wing for the foundation, names of women she wanted to hire, letters from girls she had once mentored. At the bottom was a folder marked Phase 2. On the cover, Evelyn's house, a place for daughters. It was her final wish, her greatest gift, her unfinished legacy. And now, it was mine to carry. I stood by the window, Grace's final letter clutched in my hand, the sound of the city rushing below like waves I had yet to learn how to swim in. I thought this was the end of the story, the truth revealed, the love restored, the legacy passed on. But just as I turned to begin sorting the foundation documents, my phone vibrated on the table. A new message. No name, no number. Just 5 words that made my blood run cold. You don't know everything yet. My fingers went numb. My breath caught. And in that moment, I realized Grace may have left me her legacy, but someone else had been watching the whole time. When I returned to the village, the ground beneath my feet felt more sacred than familiar. Because this time, I wasn't walking as the girl who once fetched water under the weight of silence, shame, and unanswered questions. I came carrying the ashes of the only woman who dared to resurrect the truth, holding a name that was once erased, and honoring a dream that had survived decades of burial under tradition, fear, and forgetting. I didn't come to revisit the past. I came to rewrite it, to build in the same soil where everything had once been lost, and in doing so, to let my mother's ghost breathe freely for the first time in her own homeland. The village greeted me with cautious eyes, like they were looking at a ghost made flesh. People peeked from behind doorways, whispers floated behind my steps, and old women sat with wrinkled hands folded in their laps, watching me with a mixture of recognition and regret. I had expected resistance, maybe even resentment, but what I found instead was a kind of quiet readiness, like the earth itself had been waiting for someone to return and finish the story. I came with a truck full of materials, documents signed in the city, plans approved by the district council, and Grace's handwritten sketches folded inside my journal. But more than that, I came with purpose, her final wish stitched into every breath I took. I would not let her die in the shadows. I would not let Evelyn remain a rumor. This village would remember them both. We broke ground on the old field near the school, where Evelyn had once dreamed of teaching. It was the same ground where rumors had grown like weeds, where girls had been taught to be silent, where my mother's truth had been buried for years. Now it would become the foundation for something new, Evelyn's house, a home for abandoned girls, survivors, and daughters who needed a place to belong. Construction was slow, but steady. It started with a small crew, mostly young boys curious about the girl who came back with city papers and a steady voice. Then the women came, first 1, then 3, then 10, offering hands, tools, stories. They didn't ask many questions, but when they looked at the blueprints, their eyes softened. Perhaps they too had daughters who never came home. Perhaps they, too, had buried truths. Even Rose, my village mother, came every morning with a basket of food and a thermos of tea. She never apologized again, not because she didn't want to, but because we both knew that some bonds don't need words to repair. She picked up a paintbrush, swept the floor, hummed to the girls, and in those small actions, she rebuilt herself in my eyes. When the building was finished, a modest 2-room structure with a porch made from reclaimed wood and walls decorated with hand-painted vines, I stood in the doorway and let the wind carry Grace's ashes across the field. No crowd, no prayers, just me, whispering her name to the soil and thanking her for turning her grief into something beautiful. "I'm home," I whispered, "and you are, too." We opened the doors 1 week later. 5 girls arrived in the first 2 days, tired, dirty, afraid to speak. Some had bruises, some had stories, some only had silence. But we gave them beds, warm food, and rules made of compassion. I didn't ask them what they'd lost. I only asked what they hoped to find. And slowly, the silence broke. Laughter echoed off the walls. Girls braided each other's hair, drew on the chalkboard, played barefoot in the courtyard, and began to write letters to mothers they never met. In those small, beautiful rituals, Evelyn's spirit lived again. Rose became the head cook. The villagers began dropping off supplies: rice, beans, oil, books. Someone donated a used bicycle. The teacher at the school offered to tutor the girls. Even the chief visited quietly, leaving a small envelope marked, "For Evelyn's Dream." What they had once ignored, they now watered like a garden finally blooming. And in the center of it all, I stood, not as a visitor or an outsider, but as the living thread between two mothers, two homes, and a truth too powerful to stay hidden. At the opening ceremony, I stood on the porch with Rose on one side, and the girls lined up in front. The ribbon was cut, the people clapped, and I spoke the only words I had prepared. This place was built from pain, but it will live through hope. This is not just Evelyn's house. This is every girl's house. Applause followed. But just as I stepped down from the porch, a little girl in a faded pink dress approached me. She held something clutched in both hands, something folded, torn, and stained. She looked up at me with wide eyes and a whisper trembling on her lips. "I think she's my sister," she said. I knelt slowly. "Who?" She handed me the torn photo. I unfolded it carefully. It was a picture of Evelyn, young, smiling, holding a newborn baby. But beside her was another woman, one I didn't recognize. There was no name, no note, only a hollow silence where more answers should have been. I looked at the child again, my heart pounding, my hands suddenly cold. There was something familiar in the woman's eyes in the photo, something unresolved, something unfinished, and in that moment, as the celebration continued around us and laughter rang through Evelyn's house, I realized the story wasn't over. Because when you open the door to truth, you don't just find answers, you invite more questions. And maybe Grace wasn't the last ghost I had to set free. As I stood once again at the edge of the same quiet river where my journey unknowingly began, I was no longer the nameless girl who once bent down to fetch water beneath the indifferent sky. I was the product of every woman who had dared to love me, protect me, and fight for the truth when no one else would. And though the river still flowed with the same ancient rhythm, carrying secrets past sun-baked stones and broken roots, something inside me had shifted forever, because now I understood that the moment I lifted that jerry can wasn't about helping a stranger. It was the universe gently handing me my past, my identity, and a legacy that had been waiting in silence to be awakened. The riverbank was empty when I arrived, just as it had been all those years ago. The morning fog hung low, veiling the landscape like a secret not yet ready to be told. In my hand was a small metal pail, not because I needed water, but because I needed to honor the girl I once was. The one who walked this same path with no idea that her name, her bloodline, her very existence was a carefully kept mystery, waiting to be unraveled by a stranger who would arrive, carrying more than questions. She carried answers written in the shape of a photo, a letter, a face I'd never seen, but somehow recognized. Each year, I returned to this place, not just for remembrance, but for reflection, for closure, for peace. Since we had found the little girl's sister and reconnected a broken family, the foundation had grown far beyond what I once imagined. Evelyn's house was no longer a single building on borrowed land. It was now a network, a movement, really, stretching across villages, counties, even borders. We had opened 5 centers across the region. We offered schooling, shelter, healthcare, and most importantly, we offered forgotten girls something the world had denied them for too long: a name and a voice. Each child had their own story, their own loss, their own quiet strength. But no matter how different they were from me, they all looked at me with the same question in their eyes. Could I really belong somewhere? And every time, I had the same answer. Yes, you belong here. The power of truth is that it does not shrink with time. It expands. It echoes. And once spoken, it demands to be heard again and again. That's why I never stopped telling my story. From city halls to dirt floor classrooms, from university conferences to evening fireside circles in remote villages, I carried Grace and Evelyn's legacy in my voice. I told the story of the woman who was searching not just for a lost child, but for a lost part of herself, of the sister who died too soon, yet somehow managed to leave behind a heartbeat that never stopped echoing in the people she touched, and of the village girl who didn't know her real name until kindness handed it back to her. I told it not for pity, not for applause, but so that every girl listening would know she could be found too. Each year, I visited Grace and Evelyn's graves. We buried them side by side, beneath the old neem tree near the foundation's original site. I planted lilies, Grace's favorite, and sunflowers for Evelyn, who used to say they reminded her of hope. I sat between the stones, often with a thermos of tea and a small notebook filled with updates, stories of the girls we helped, letters we received from children reunited with their mothers, poems written by survivors. I read those words aloud, as if the wind might carry them into eternity. And sometimes, when the wind shifted just right, it felt like they were still listening. And yet, I never allowed success to distract me from the origin of it all. That first morning, that silent walk, that jerry can, that question, were you born here? It was such a simple moment, so ordinary, so easy to miss. But it became the turning point of my entire existence. That's why I returned every year to fetch water from this same river, because I owed everything to the kindness that happened here. And I never wanted to forget how it all began. The final time I returned, something felt different. The air was warmer, the sky clearer, the silence deeper. I walked to the riverbank alone, sat down, and let my fingers trail through the water. I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just remembered. Every face, every word, every woman. I thought about how it all started, not with a revelation, not with a scream, not even with a letter, but with one simple act of reaching out. One moment of shared silence between a lost girl and a woman who already knew where that silence would lead. It all began with one act of kindness, one breath, one question, one step toward truth. I helped a woman carry water, and she carried me back to where I truly belonged. And now, as I stand here years later, with a world rebuilt from that moment, I realize something powerful. Maybe the real miracle isn't that I found my family. Maybe it's that I finally became someone else's Grace. If this story touched your heart, imagine how many others are still waiting to be found. Like, share, and subscribe to support real stories that uncover forgotten voices. Drop a comment if you've ever experienced a moment that changed everything. And remember, sometimes the smallest act of kindness can rewrite an entire life.